My name is Rutherford. I'm a clarinet player, and I think most of you in here know that I'm wanting to be a primary school teacher. So this year for my project I decided to look into music education a wee bit more because it's something I'm very, very interested in and passionate about. And when we were in the teaching musician module, I think I'm probably one of the few people in this room that got quite a lot out of that module, but we learnt a little bit about the Kodaly method and the Suzuki method, which are two very well-renowned and well-researched methods of teaching music to young children. So I decided to do a wee bit of research on that because the thing is that I noticed that there are a lot of similarities between some of the ideas in these methods and the way that Scottish music has been taught for centuries. Obviously there isn't like a standardised way of teaching Scottish music, but the kind of things that are universal, such as learning orally and learning in groups and going to sessions, learning from your peers, that kind of thing, the kind of community environment, is very central to these kinds of things. And I thought that was really interesting. So I wanted to see if there were any more similarities or if there was anything that we could use from these methods for teaching music to children. Ah, woo! This is a cool thing. This is going to be a nightmare, isn't it?
Can we just sideswipe?
Hey! So, in order to research this, I made very, very good use of the RCS library and accumulated many a late fee. I also found very many online resources that I could use. There's things like the Kodaly Institute and the Suzuki Institute both have fantastic websites that you can go and look at. I was also very fortunate to be able to interview both students, a student of the Kodaly method and also a teacher and a student of the Suzuki method. And that was fantastic, but because I was a wee bit biased for the Suzuki there, I was also fortunate enough to be able to go to a Kodaly class, sit in, and even take some of the lessons myself. So I've become fairly well versed in the Kodaly method and the Suzuki method. I've been relying mostly on my own experiences with traditional music and also the experiences of my peers. So then, beginning with the Kodaly method, which was started by this guy here. This is Sultan Kodaly, who started the methods in the 20th century. And the reason that he decided to do this was because he'd gone into a primary school and he was appalled at the standard of singing that the children were exhibiting. It was dreadful, and he wasn't happy about this. And also, people were coming into the conservatoires where he was teaching and they could barely read music. And it was just no use. So he decided that what he was going to do was he was going to start up these singing schools where music literacy is given the same amount of focus as numeracy or reading, that kind of thing. So he started up the first one in 1950, and by 1965, 15 years later, more than half of the primary schools in Hungary were of this kind, thanks to the efforts of this guy here. This means you've got generations of musically literate people coming through Hungary who don't necessarily go on to become professional musicians in the same way that you don't study maths in primary school and go on to become a mathematician, obviously. So then, the main ideas of the Kodaly methods are that you start learning music from a very, very young age. You start pretty much from when you are a child, very, very young. You also get taught pitching and rhythm based on your developmental age rather than your actual age. The music that is used in the Kodaly methods is folk music, and also music that is composed by recognised composers. And the reason for this was because, in kind of conjunction with the fact that he was appalled by primary school children singing, they were also singing the kind of songs that are written for primary school children to learn music with. And he just thought it was so contrived and awful and he hated it, so he decided that this was going to be a really big part of his methods. Also, to make it a lot more enjoyable for the children who are learning it, they learn via games and they learn via songs. They barely know that they're learning, and that's probably the best way that you can teach a child music. So, the Kodaly method uses these things here. These are hand signs which were developed by John Kerwin, but these days they're very much associated with the Kodaly methods. And the first thing that you learn is the interval of so-mi. So-mi, like that. And then once you've got that, that's the minor third. That's the most recognised interval that a child can learn. It's universal the world over. It's a really interesting thing to learn about, actually. I was really, really fascinated when I was reading about this because from Japan to America to even here, this is the interval that your parents used to call you for tea. Rachel! Everybody knows it. It's so ingrained in your head. After that, you add la, so you get so, mi, la, and then you get so, mi, la, so, mi, na, 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 na. and it's all ingrained in their heads, and it's so interesting. So then, after that, you add do and re, and then you get do, re, mi, so, la. That's the pentatonic scale, as everyone in here knows, which is very, very common in all kinds of folk music. This would be very, very useful for teaching somebody folk music, because once you can sing something, it's so much easier to play it. When you're teaching rhythm, the Kodaly method recommends that you start teaching with duple meter, which, according to Zoltan Kodaly, was the easiest rhythm for a child to pick up. So the way that they do that is that they use vocables. So they use ta, tete, and ta. So you've got ta, which is your crotchet. You've got tete, which are your quavers, and then you've got ta, which is your minim. Now, when I was in the Kodaly, I was in a wee Kodaly group with lots of wee kids there, and the way that they were learning it was that they had 3 bears. So they had Mummy Bear, who was the crotchet, and she was walking at a normal pace, and she was going ta, 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 ta. And then you had Baby Bear, who was wee bear, and he was going ti, 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 ti. And then you had Daddy Bear, who was going ta, ta. And they were all getting up and they were doing it around the room, and it was great. You know, it was all kinetic movement, it was all, you know, they were seeing it, so it was auditory and visual and kinetic all at the same time. It's a really, really good way of teaching. Can you use it in Scottish music? I'd say so. However, I was really, really intrigued because when I went to the Kodaly classes, the songs that they were using, there wasn't a single piece of Scottish music used, which I think is really weird because we have so much. And I think that possibly part of the reason for this is that we have a lot of children's music in jig time or 6/8 time. If you think about it, you've got stuff like, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but you do have a lot, I will promise you that. And I think that it's a really, really weird thing that most of the tunes that were used were in fact American. Madeline. They were American, and it was really strange because there's all these kids sitting there not knowing that they have this wealth of music around them, necessarily not knowing, and they're all singing American tunes instead of singing Scottish children's tunes. And it was really weird. I think I was trying to find a reason for this, and unfortunately I think possibly the reason is just that American Kodaly materials are a lot more readily available. So I think that maybe somebody should kind of, you know, maybe write a program about this. Maybe I should do that. I probably should, actually. That may be a project for me in the future. So moving on to the Suzuki method, which was developed by this man here, Shinichi Suzuki. He also developed his in the 20th century, around the same kind of time that the Kodaly method was being developed. He developed it because he had a sudden epiphany one day that all Japanese children could speak Japanese. I know you're laughing, it doesn't sound that interesting, does it? But the thing is, Romy, he reasoned that if all Japanese children could speak Japanese fluently by the age of 3, with like any weird dialects that they happen to have from the area that they're living in, that shows a remarkable talent, doesn't it? Yeah, you're nodding, there we go. Shows a remarkable talent and attitude for learning. If they're able to learn that much at the age of 3, then imagine what they could do if you started teaching them music that young. So what he started to do was he developed a method called talent education, which tries to recreate the kind of nurturing environment that a child has when they're learning their first language. He did this because he firmly believed that talent is not something that is inborn, it's something that is nurtured and developed. Now the main idea is the Suzuki method. As I say, you start from a very, very young age. Suzuki students can start from anything from the age of 3. You get like tiny little quarter-sized violins, they're adorable. Your parents have a very, very active part in the learning process, again drawing from this nurturing environment kind of thing. So the parent will come to the lessons, they will sit in on the lessons, they'll supervise the practice, they will sometimes even learn the instrument if the child's not that interested, being 3. And the other important part of this is group lessons and group performances. The thing is that the Suzuki method is across a series of books, and if you learn an instrument via the Suzuki method, then all other people who have learnt via the Suzuki method will have the same repertoire as you. So that means you're able to play in a group, whether you're playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or Bartok, you can play in a group with other people, which I think is fantastic, to be honest. And it's quite like going to a session and knowing all the tunes, really, isn't it? The same kind of idea of community learning is very, very important. So then, the Suzuki method is completely oral for the first couple of years of study. This is because this is how you learn your first language, isn't it? It's not like you're presented with books at the age of 2. And the way that it works is that the music is played in the background of the child's daily life. So the child can be playing, the child might be having their dinner, music's playing in the background all the time, they're getting familiarised with it, that means that they can play it on the piano a lot easier. As I say, the common repertoire, also, performance is not treated like it's a big deal. I went to a group performance in Edinburgh, I believe you guys came as well, and the children were all there, and the performance wasn't treated like it was a really big deal. The kids were just invited up, they could play if they wanted to, they didn't have to if they didn't want to, they were encouraged to, and the parents were all there and they were all clapping and they were all encouraged to sing along and clap along. It was just a very nice, informal environment, and it was really, really great, I thought. As somebody who suffers from performance anxiety. I wish I'd had that when I was younger. So can I use it in Scottish music? Absolutely. In the Edinburgh Institute where we went, they actually teach Scottish music quite a lot there. They do a lot of Scottish music there. Because it lends itself so easily, because you're learning it all orally, you're learning it via recordings and that kind of thing. And that's very, very similar to the way that a lot of Scottish musicians learn. They take recordings and then they just are able to play it after listening to it many, many times in some cases. So then, after having researched both of them, I can't really say that one is better than the other. There's a lot of people who have a lot of debate about that, but I can say that a lot of them have their own benefits and their own weaknesses. I think that if you were to kind of incorporate both, or like elements of both, I think that if you could find something that worked for you while looking at both the methods, if you could incorporate that into your teaching practice, your students would be phenomenal. You know? If they were able to sing to the standard that the Kodaly method wants them to, as well as being able to play orally without looking at the music to the standard that the Suzuki method wants, I think you'd end up with some really, really fantastic students. So if you're able to incorporate that into your daily practice and your practice for teaching, I think you'd end up a really good musician. So, any questions?
Great. Fred, anything from you?
Yeah, you've broached an interesting subject. Kodaly was steeped in national traditions. He believed in national traditions. He got himself into trouble with the Russians as a result when the tanks were coming in, 56. And this whole idea of learning through association with your immediate environment is so important in terms of language and in terms of, and music is a language. I think the fact that you've introduced that, I think that could be developed further. I think it's a really significant point. It's like going up, and I say this so often, riding a hobby horse, up and down the country, and we see Strathdean, Strathdon, Strathclyde, and the children don't know what a strath is, you know, flat land by a river bank. The Lunadee, Dunfermline, what's a linn? A linn is a waterfall. The more you know about your immediate environment, the more associations you have, the more your brain has something to latch onto. And that idea, and Kodaly would have certainly believed that in terms of Hungarian folk music and what have you. So doing, you know, just concentrating on American folk music in middle Scotland is necessary, and it's an interesting point that you've introduced, and I think one that's, you know, could bear some fruit as well. But I'm digressing. But I think that's an important point. It's a good point.
Any students? Any questions or comments?
In terms of applying Kodaly to traditional music, do you think there's a hypocrisy in the fact that you said there was a focus on being musically literate, but you can get to conservatoire level studying traditional music and not be able to read music?
You can, but once you get here you do tend to be either, well, it's encouraged that you do learn to read music, and it can be quite difficult once you're up to our kind of age because your brain's not in that kind of sponge state, if you know what I mean. It's so much easier to learn things when you're younger. Do you not agree? Like, remember when you were learning to read and that kind of thing, if you come up here, like, I'm still learning how to read bass clef properly and I'm a harpist. It's dreadful.
So you think maybe Kodaly method could be like a solution to that.
I think
issue.
it could certainly be a supplement, if not a solution. I think so, certainly.
Did you come across much in terms of teaching, like did those guys teach kinda without genre? Like, they weren't necessarily teaching classical music.
For Kodaly or
And-
Suzuki?
Either? Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, the Suzuki method is a funny one because they do try to bring in music from all genres, especially in the earlier books. When I was in Edinburgh at the Suzuki Institute there, it is mostly trad music that they do there. I think that's probably because it's Mary McCarthy who teaches it, who is an Irish accordion player, so she likes that. Kodaly wise, I can't really comment because the problem is, of course, there wasn't any.
Kind of comparison.
Yeah, there wasn't, but they don't tend to go on to like classical music. Like you can't really solfege out Mozart. You can try, but it might not be appropriate for like a 5-year-old to do.
Just kind of wondered always kind of whether the teaching would be put towards necessarily a specific genre or learning an instrument as an instrument and applying it to different.
I think
But
it tends.
I mind Suzuki like.
It
there was a
tends
bit
to
smart
be
content.
it tends to be kind of broader. But then once you decide what you want to do, you then narrow it down yourself. I know that here they actually do Kodaly in the junior conservatoire. Again, with kind of no Scottish music involved at all. It is a funny thing. But yeah, and then obviously they go on to do jazz, they go on to do trad, they go on to do whatever they like. So yeah, you can use it for anything really.
So when, sorry, I think Laurie had a comment, and then we'll have to move on.
Rachel, are there any aspects of traditional music tuition and teaching in Scotland that you think the Kodaly and Suzuki methods might benefit from?
That's a good question. Well, the problem is that there isn't really a standardised way of teaching traditional music. You know, there's just kind of the way that things are done, if you know what I mean. So that means that like it could be done differently by different teachers in different parts of Scotland. So I'd say that if it could be standardised, I don't know if we really want it to be standardised either, is the other thing. Because then that's a whole other can of worms. But I don't know, I need to do some research on that, I think. I was very much focusing on the other way rather than me
I
helping
just
them.
wondered if in your own experience you'd identified some strengths in the variety of teaching practice that we have here that others might benefit from. But maybe something to think about in the future.
Yeah, something to think about, I think.
Did you have something?
The only other thing I wanted to say in passing is many of us learn, for instance, of piping in an oral tradition,
Yeah.
through cantor and what have you, which would run somewhat parallel to some of the things you're talking about,
That's very true.
which is an interesting thing to think about as well.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.